The rain hammered against the cracked windows of the refugee shelter on Station Kappa 7, each drop echoing through the metal corridors like distant gunfire. Maya-chan pressed her face against the cold plasteel, watching the water streak down in chaotic patterns that reminded her of the tears she no longer allowed herself to shed. Behind her, the shelter buzzed with the quiet desperation of 300 displaced humans, all remnants of the failed colony on Zirian Prime. "Another day in paradise," she muttered, pulling her threadbare jacket tighter around her shoulders. The fabric had once been military grade, issued to her during her service with the Terran Defense Corps, but years of wear had reduced it to little more than a comfort blanket. The patches and faded insignias told a story she preferred to keep buried. Maya turned away from the window and surveyed the shelter's main hall. Families huddled together on thin sleeping mats, their possessions reduced to whatever they could carry during the evacuation. Children played with makeshift toys while their parents stared at datapads, searching endlessly for work opportunities that seemed increasingly rare for displaced humans in this sector of the galaxy. The Galactic Council had been generous enough to provide temporary housing, but temporary had stretched into 8 months. 8 months of tasteless nutrient paste, recycled air, and the constant reminder that humanity was still considered the newcomers in a galaxy dominated by species with millennia of spacefaring experience. "Maya," called a voice from across the hall. She turned to see Dr. Sarah Kim, waving her over to the medical station. Sarah was one of the few other veterans in the shelter, though her service had been as a combat medic rather than frontline infantry. "We've got a situation brewing near the food distribution center. Some of the newer arrivals are getting antsy about the meal schedule." Maya nodded and followed Sarah through the maze of sleeping areas. As they walked, she noticed how the refugees instinctively stepped aside for her, even though she held no official authority in the shelter. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, or perhaps the scars on her hands that spoke of violence survived. Whatever the reason, people seemed to recognize something in her that commanded respect. The food distribution center occupied a corner of the shelter's main level, dominated by a series of industrial food processors that churned out the daily rations. The machines hummed constantly, converting basic proteins and nutrients into something that technically qualified as food, though it bore little resemblance to anything humans had eaten on Earth or the colonies. A crowd had gathered near the serving window, their voices raised in frustration. Maya could see Administrator Wells, a thin man with nervous eyes who had been appointed by the council to oversee the shelter's operations. He was gesticulating wildly at a group of refugees, his face red with exasperation. "I understand your concerns," Wells was saying, his voice shrill above the crowd's murmur, "but we cannot simply change the meal schedule to accommodate individual preferences. The processors require specific intervals for optimal nutrition synthesis." "Optimal nutrition?" scoffed a woman near the front of the crowd. Maya recognized her as Jennifer Park, a former teacher from the Zirian colony. "This paste tastes like recycled air filters. My children are losing weight, and you talk about optimization?" The crowd murmured agreement, and Maya could sense the tension building. These people had lost everything: their homes, their communities, their sense of purpose. The one thing they still had was their dignity, and Wells seemed determined to chip away at that as well. Maya pushed through the crowd, her presence causing a gradual hush to fall over the assembled refugees. She had learned long ago that sometimes leadership wasn't about authority or rank. It was about being willing to stand up when others couldn't. "What's the real problem here?" Maya asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. She directed the question at Wells, but her eyes swept over the crowd, taking in their faces, reading their expressions. Wells straightened his jacket nervously. "The refugee population has been requesting modifications to the meal service. They want to supplement the processed nutrition with actual cooking. But the council's guidelines are very specific about food safety protocols and resource allocation." "And what would be wrong with letting people cook their own food?" Maya asked, genuinely curious. "Well, for one thing, we don't have cooking facilities beyond the basic processors. And there are concerns about waste, about inefficiency. The current system provides exactly the nutrients required for human survival. Anything more is. He paused, searching for the right word, unnecessary. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had heard that word before, usually from bureaucrats and politicians who had never spent a night wondering if they would see another dawn. Unnecessary. As if the small comforts that made life bearable were luxuries that displaced people didn't deserve. I see, Maya said quietly. And have you tasted the processed nutrition yourself, Administrator? Wells flushed deeper. That's not. I have access to the officer's mess, naturally, but that doesn't mean I don't understand the challenges faced by the refugee population. The crowd stirred again, but Maya raised her hand slightly, and they settled. There was something in her manner that suggested she had a plan, and after 8 months of powerlessness, they were willing to listen to anyone who seemed to have an idea. Dr. Kim, Maya said, turning to her friend, what would be the medical implications of allowing the refugees to prepare their own meals? Sarah stepped forward, clearly understanding that this was more than a casual question. Actually, there would likely be significant psychological benefits. Food preparation is tied to cultural identity and personal autonomy. Many of our residents are showing signs of depression and learned helplessness. Giving them some control over their daily routines could be therapeutically valuable. Wells opened his mouth to object, but Maya cut him off with a look that had once been effective at stopping enemy charges. Here's what's going to happen, Maya announced, her voice carrying clearly across the crowd. We're going to set up a proper kitchen, not just for efficiency, but because these people deserve to eat food that tastes like food. Now wait just a minute, Wells sputtered. The council regulations clearly state that Maya interrupted, state that refugee populations must be provided with adequate nutrition and housing. They say nothing about the quality of that nutrition or the method of its preparation. She turned to face the crowd fully, and her voice took on the tone she had once used to address her troops before a difficult mission. I know some of you were cooks before the evacuation. Some of you grew up helping your grandmothers prepare family meals. Some of you missed the smell of real bread baking or the sound of vegetables sizzling in a pan. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Maya could see tears in some eyes. She was touching on something deeper than hunger. She was talking about identity, about the things that made them human rather than just refugees. We're going to need cooking equipment, real ingredients, space to work. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But if we work together, we can make this place feel less like a processing center and more like a community. An older man near the back of the crowd raised his hand tentatively. Maya nodded at him to speak. I used to run a restaurant on Zirian, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lost everything when the storms hit. Haven't cooked a real meal since we got here. But I remember how. What's your name? Maya asked. Shen Li. No relation, he added with a weak smile, noting their shared surname. Mr. Chun, would you be willing to help organize a cooking rotation? Train others who want to learn. The old man's eyes brightened for the first time since Maya had noticed him in a shelter. Yes, I would like that very much. More hands began to rise throughout the crowd. A former baker's assistant, a woman who had grown herbs in her apartment on the colony, a teenager who had learned to make traditional dumplings from his grandmother before the family fled their homeworld. Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the desperate hope of someone waiting for rescue, but the solid, practical hope of people who were ready to take action. Administrator Wells, Maya said, turning back to the flustered bureaucrat, I'll need a complete inventory of available storage space and any equipment that might be repurposed for food preparation. Also, I want to know what our budget looks like for supplementing the processed rations. This is highly irregular, Wells protested. I'll need to clear this with my superiors. There are procedures, protocols. Of course, Maya agreed smoothly. But while you're checking on procedures, we'll be figuring out practical solutions. Unless you'd prefer to explain to your superiors why you have a full-scale riot on your hands over something as simple as decent food. Wells paled at the implication, clearly understanding that maintaining order in the shelter was a significant part of his performance evaluation. "I'll, I'll see what I can do," he mumbled, retreating toward his office. As the crowd began to disperse, people approached Maya individually, offering skills and expressing gratitude. She found herself at the center of something she hadn't expected, a community beginning to form around the simple idea that they deserved better than mere survival. Dr. Kim appeared at her elbow as the last of the refugees drifted away. "That was well handled," she said quietly. "But, this is going to be more complicated than it sounds. Equipment, ingredients, space, permission from the council." Maya nodded. "One problem at a time. Right now, we've given people something to work toward instead of just something to endure. That's a start. What made you decide to take this on?" Sarah asked. "You've been keeping a pretty low profile since we got here." Maya was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. "During the war, I learned something about morale. Soldiers can handle almost anything if they feel like human beings instead of equipment. These people aren't soldiers, but they're fighting a different kind of battle. Against despair, against becoming invisible." She paused, then added more quietly, "Besides, I'm tired of feeling useless. At least in combat, I knew what I was supposed to do." Sarah studied her friend's profile, noting the tension in her shoulders that never quite went away. "You're not useless, Maya. You never have been. Try telling that to the Veterans Affairs office on Centauri Station. According to them, my skills aren't transferable to civilian occupations." Maya's laugh held no humor. "Turns out there's not much call for infantry tactics in the civilian job market." "Their loss," Sarah said firmly. "But, Maya, this kitchen project, it's going to put you in a leadership position whether you want it or not. Are you ready for that?" Maya looked around the shelter's main hall, taking in the families, the elderly refugees, the young people who had never known any life but this transient existence. She thought about the war, about the friends she had lost, about the sense of purpose that had died with her military career. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "But they need someone to fight for them, and fighting is the one thing I know how to do." As evening approached, Maya found herself back at the window, watching the rain continue its assault on the station's hull. But now, instead of seeing chaos in the water's patterns, she found herself thinking about organization, about logistics, about the practical steps needed to transform an idea into reality. Behind her, she could hear quiet conversations continuing among the refugees. Plans being made, hope taking root. For the first time since arriving at the shelter, Maya Chun allowed herself to believe that tomorrow might be different from today. And for the first time since leaving the service, she felt like she had a mission worth completing. Maya woke before dawn, as she had every day for the past 15 years. Military habits died hard, even in civilian life. The shelter's artificial lighting system was still dimmed to simulate night, but she could see the faint glow of emergency strips along the corridors. Around her, 300 people slept fitfully on thin mats, their quiet breathing creating a susurrus that reminded her of wind through tall grass. She had been thinking about the kitchen project all night, running logistics in her head the way she used to plan missions. The first challenge would be space. The shelter was designed for maximum efficiency, not comfort or community activities. The second challenge would be equipment. The third would be convincing the station's administration that allowing refugees to cook their own food wouldn't somehow lead to chaos and rebellion. Maya slipped from her sleeping mat and made her way quietly toward the shelter's administrative section. She had learned the guard rotations weeks ago, more from habit than necessity, and she knew that the night shift supervisor would be alone in the main office. Lieutenant Torres looked up from his datapad as Maya approached the security checkpoint. He was young, probably fresh out of the academy, assigned to what was essentially a babysitting job, while more experienced officers handled the important work of maintaining order in the galaxy. "Early morning, Chun," he said, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who wasn't quite sure how to categorize her. She wasn't officially staff, but she wasn't exactly a typical refugee either. "Couldn't sleep," Maya replied honestly. "Mind if I take a look at the station schematics? I want to see if there are any unused spaces that might work for the kitchen project." Torres hesitated. Station blueprints weren't exactly classified, but they weren't usually shared with civilian populations either. On the other hand, Maya's request the previous day had been approved by Administrator Wells, and Torres had been present during enough of her interactions with the shelter's residents to recognize that she was some kind of unofficial leader among them. "I guess that would be okay," he said finally, activating a wall display. "What exactly are you looking for?" Maya stepped up to the holographic projection of Station Kappa 7. The structure was typical of mid-range refugee facilities, a central hub containing administrative offices and medical facilities, surrounded by 4 residential pods connected by transit tubes. The shelter occupied most of Pod C, with some overflow into Pod D. "Something big enough to install proper cooking equipment," Maya said, studying the layout. "Preferably with access to water, power, and ventilation systems." Torres highlighted several areas on the display. These sections in Pod B are currently in use. They were designed as additional residential space, but the refugee population hasn't grown as much as originally projected. Maya nodded, making mental notes. Pod B was connected to the main shelter by a short transit tube, close enough to be convenient, but separate enough to reduce concerns about fire or other cooking-related hazards. "What about storage?" she asked. "To the cargo bay on level 3, that's only about half full. The council uses it for emergency supply stockpiles, but there's definitely extra space." Maya studied the schematics for several more minutes, visualizing foot traffic patterns and supply lines. It was like planning a forward operating base, just with different objectives. "Thanks," she said finally. "This helped a lot." "Maya," Torres said as she turned to leave, "can I ask you something?" She paused, waiting. "Yesterday, when you stood up to Wells, some of the other staff were saying you're former military. Is that true?" Maya considered her answer carefully. She had learned that people reacted differently once they knew about her service record, usually with either excessive deference or suspicious wariness. "Terran Defense Corps," she said simply. "Infantry. Did 3 tours during the Centauri conflict." Torres' expression shifted slightly, becoming more respectful. The Centauri conflict had ended only 5 years ago, and everyone in the military knew it had been brutal. Frontline infantry veterans were either dead or very, very good at their jobs. "My older brother served in the Centauri theater," Torres said quietly. "Ship-to-ship combat. He came back different." Maya nodded. She had heard similar stories countless times. "War changes everyone. Some of us just hide it better." "Is that what you're doing here?" "Hiding." The question was more perceptive than Maya had expected from the young officer. She found herself studying his face, noting the intelligence in his eyes despite his nervous manner. "Maybe," she admitted. "Or maybe I'm trying to figure out what comes after hiding." Back in the shelter, Maya found that word of the kitchen project had spread overnight. Small groups of refugees clustered around the food distribution center, their voices animated with a kind of energy she hadn't heard since the early days after the evacuation. People who had barely spoken to each other were suddenly deep in conversation about recipes, techniques, and memories of meals from their former lives. Chun-Li, the former restaurant owner, had apparently become an unofficial coordinator. Maya found him sitting at one of the common tables, surrounded by handwritten notes and rough sketches of kitchen layouts. "Ms. Chun," he said, rising respectfully as she approached. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of talking to some of the others about what we might need." Maya gestured for him to sit back down. "That's exactly what I was hoping would happen. What have you learned?" Chun-Li spread his notes across the table. "We have more culinary experience than I expected. Mrs. Patel used to cater events on New Mumbai. The Kozlov family ran a small farm and knows preservation techniques. Young Tommy Nguyen has been experimenting with hydroponics in the shelter's maintenance closets." "Hydroponics?" Maya asked, intrigued. "Growing herbs and small vegetables in artificial environments," Chun-Li explained. "Apparently he's been trading with some of the station's maintenance crew for equipment. Administrator Wells doesn't know about it." Maya made a mental note to talk with Tommy Nguyen. Initiative like that suggested someone who could be useful in more ways than one. "What about equipment needs?" she asked. Chun-Li consulted his notes. "Basic cooking surfaces, obviously. Ovens, if we can manage it. Storage for ingredients. But the big challenge is going to be ingredients themselves. The council's food allocation is calculated to provide exact nutrition through the processed meals. If we want to cook real food, we need access to basic raw materials. Maya had been thinking about the same problem. What if we could supplement the official rations? Trade for additional supplies? Trade with what? Chunli asked practically. Most of us lost everything in the evacuation. Not everything, Maya said thoughtfully. We lost our possessions, our homes, our jobs. But we still have skills, knowledge, experience. This is a working station with ongoing maintenance needs, personnel requirements, problems that need solving. Dr. Kim appeared at Maya's shoulder, having approached while she was deep in conversation with Chun-Li. Speaking of problems, Sarah said, we might have one developing. Administrator Wells has been in communication with his superiors all morning. There's going to be an inspection team arriving from the council tomorrow. Maya felt her stomach tighten. What kind of inspection? Officially? Routine facility evaluation. Unofficially? I think Wells panicked about yesterday's confrontation and called for backup. Maya closed her eyes, running scenarios in her head. An inspection team would mean scrutiny, questions about unauthorized modifications to shelter protocols, potential reclassification of the facility status. In the worst case, it could mean transfers to different stations, separation of the refugee community that was just beginning to coalesce around shared purpose. Who's coming? She asked. A 3-person team. Administrative oversight, medical evaluation, and security assessment. Maya's experience with military inspections told her that the security assessment was the real concern. Administrative oversight would focus on compliance with regulations. Medical evaluation would check on the refugees' physical well-being. But security assessment meant someone was worried about potential threats to station stability. How long do we have? She asked. They arrive tomorrow afternoon. The inspection is scheduled for the following morning. Maya looked around the shelter's main area, taking in the buzz of activity around the kitchen project. Less than 24 hours ago, these people had been listless and demoralized. Now they were animated, purposeful, working together towards something meaningful. The transformation was remarkable, but it was also exactly the kind of thing that would concern a security assessor. We need to be smart about this, Maya said quietly, drawing Sarah and Chun-Li closer. If the inspection team sees a bunch of refugees organizing around unauthorized activities, they're going to shut us down hard. So we stop the kitchen project? Chun-Li asked, his voice heavy with disappointment. No, Maya said firmly. We make it look official. She stood up, her mind already working through the details. Sarah, I need you to document the medical benefits of improved nutrition and community engagement. Make it clinical, professional, the kind of report that administrative types love to see. What kind of documentation? Sarah asked. Psychological wellness evaluations, nutritional deficiency reports, community health assessments. Whatever you can put together that makes our kitchen project look like a prescribed therapeutic intervention rather than a grassroots rebellion. Maya turned to Chun-Li. How quickly can you put together a formal proposal for kitchen operations? Something that looks like it came from official channels? With the right help, maybe 6 hours? Do it. Make it thorough, professional, and boring. Include safety protocols, waste management procedures, cost-benefit analysis. The more bureaucratic it looks, the better. Dr. Kim was studying Maya with an expression of surprised respect. You're going to try to make them think this was their idea all along. Not exactly their idea, Maya said, but I want them to see a well-organized, officially sanctioned program that enhances refugee well-being while maintaining station security. I want them to see controlled cooperation, not potential rebellion. She paused, then added more quietly, I also want them to see that we're not just refugees waiting for someone else to solve our problems. We're a community with skills, leadership, and the ability to contribute to our own well-being. Throughout the day, Maya moved through the shelter like a general preparing for battle. She identified the refugees with the most professional bearing and asked them to be visible during the inspection. She worked with Chun-Li to establish clear hierarchies and procedures for the kitchen project, making sure everything could be explained in terms that bureaucrats would find comfortable. Most importantly, she spent time with the younger refugees, the ones who were most likely to say something inappropriate during the inspection. Not threatening them or coaching them to lie, but helping them understand how important it was to present their community in the best possible light. As evening approached, Maya found herself back at the window, but this time she wasn't alone. Several other refugees had joined her, drawn by the sense of calm authority she projected. They didn't talk much, but their presence was comforting, a reminder that whatever challenges came tomorrow, they would face them together. "Maya," said a voice behind her. She turned to see Administrator Wells approaching, his expression uncharacteristically humble. "I wanted to talk to you about tomorrow's inspection," he said quietly. "What about it?" Wells glanced around nervously, noting the other refugees within hearing distance. Could we speak privately?" Maya nodded to her companions, who drifted away tactfully. When they were alone, Wells seemed to struggle with his words. "I may have overreacted yesterday," he said finally. "When I called for the inspection team, I was concerned about maintaining order. But after watching how the community has responded to your leadership, I'm beginning to think I may have misunderstood the situation." Maya waited, letting him work through whatever he was trying to say. "The thing is," Wells continued, "my performance evaluation is largely based on refugee satisfaction and community stability. If this inspection goes badly, it could affect my career prospects significantly." Maya almost smiled. The man was asking for her help in managing an inspection that he had called to shut down her activities. It was like something out of an old military comedy. "What do you want from me, Administrator?" "I want tomorrow to go smoothly. I want the inspection team to see a well-functioning community with strong leadership and appropriate oversight. And I want them to see that the modifications to our operations are enhancing rather than threatening station security." Maya considered this. Wells wasn't a bad man, just an overwhelmed bureaucrat trying to do a job he wasn't really qualified for. And his interests, at least for the moment, aligned with those of the refugee community. "I can work with that," she said finally. "But I need something in return." "What?" "Official authorization for the kitchen project. Not just tolerance, but actual administrative support. Equipment, ingredient budget, formal recognition as a community wellness program." Wells hesitated. "That would require council approval, budget modifications." "Then get them," Maya said simply. "You got an inspection team coming tomorrow. If they see a successful program that improves refugee morale while maintaining security, they'll probably recommend expanding it to other facilities. That's the kind of innovation that gets bureaucrats promoted." Maya could see Wells' mind working, weighing risks against potential rewards. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do." As he walked away, Maya turned back to the window. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but also opportunities. She had learned a long time ago that the difference between winning and losing often came down to who was better prepared and who was willing to adapt when the situation changed. Behind her, the shelter continued its quiet buzz of activity. People were already cleaning areas that might be inspected, organizing sleeping spaces, preparing for tomorrow's scrutiny. Without being asked, without formal leadership, they were working together to protect what they had built. Maya Chin allowed herself a small smile. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it as a community. And communities, she had learned, were much harder to defeat than individuals. The inspection team arrived precisely on schedule, their transport docking with Station Kappa 7 in the early afternoon hours. Maya watched from the shelter's observation deck as 3 figures in council uniforms disembarked, their movements efficient and purposeful. She had seen similar inspections during her military service, and she recognized the body language of people who expected to find problems. Dr. Kethvar, the lead inspector, was a tall centurion with the distinctive blue-gray skin and elongated limbs of her species. Her file indicated 30 years of experience in refugee administration, with a reputation for thorough, uncompromising evaluations. Commander Brix, the security assessor, was human, but his bearing suggested military intelligence background rather than standard peacekeeping. The medical evaluator, Dr. Senkori, was a young Altarian whose species was renowned for their analytical abilities. Maya had positioned herself strategically in the shelter's main hall, not hiding, but not drawing unnecessary attention either. She wore her cleanest clothes, had tied back her hair in a practical style, and carried a data pad containing Chun Li's formal kitchen proposal. To a casual observer, she looked like any other refugee going about her daily routine. To a trained observer, she looked like someone who was exactly where she was supposed to be. Administrator Wells greeted the inspection team with the nervous enthusiasm of someone whose career prospects depended on the next few hours. Maya could hear fragments of his presentation as he led them through the initial tour, his voice pitched slightly higher than normal as he highlighted the shelter's efficiency ratings and compliance records. Our refugee population has demonstrated remarkable adaptability, Wells was saying as they passed through the main hall. Community leaders have emerged naturally, and we've seen significant improvements in psychological wellness indicators over the past several months. Dr. Kethvar paused near the food distribution center, her keen eyes taking in the modified setup that Chun-Li had implemented overnight. The area was scrupulously clean, with clearly marked stations for different aspects of food preparation. Several refugees worked quietly at various tasks, their movements coordinated and purposeful. This appears to be different from the standard nutrition distribution protocol. Dr. Kethvar observed, her voice carrying the neutral tone of someone making official notes. Maya stepped forward smoothly, timing her intervention to appear natural rather than planned. Dr. Kethvar, I'm Maya Chen. I've been working with Dr. Kim and Mr. Li to implement some community wellness initiatives. The inspector turned to study Maya, and Maya could feel herself being evaluated on multiple levels simultaneously. Centaurians were known for their ability to read micro-expressions and body language, and Maya kept her posture relaxed but confident. What kind of initiatives? Dr. Kethvar asked. Maya gestured toward Chun-Li, who approached with a tablet containing the formal proposal they had prepared. We've established a therapeutic cooking program designed to address psychological wellness concerns among the refugee population, Maya explained. Dr. Kim's medical evaluations indicated that many residents were experiencing depression and learned helplessness related to loss of autonomy and cultural identity. Dr. Senkori, the medical evaluator, looked up from his own data collection with obvious interest. Could you elaborate on the therapeutic methodology? Dr. Kim appeared at Maya's shoulder, her professional manner perfectly calibrated for the situation. The program addresses several psychological factors, Sarah began, slipping into the clinical tone she used for official reports. Food preparation activities restore a sense of personal agency and cultural connection. Community cooking creates social bonds and mutual support networks. The focus on nutrition and meal planning provides structure and forward-thinking behavior. She handed Dr. Senkori a tablet containing the medical documentation she had compiled over the past 24 hours. We've seen measurable improvements in mood indicators, sleep patterns, and community engagement since the program began, Sarah continued. The data suggests that this approach could be significantly more effective than standard refugee support protocols. Commander Brix, who had been silently observing the interaction, stepped forward. Maya could sense his military background in the way he positioned himself and the direct nature of his gaze. Who authorized this program? He asked bluntly. Administrator Wells shifted nervously, but Maya answered before he could speak. The program evolved organically from community needs assessments, she said truthfully. Administrator Wells has provided administrative oversight to ensure compliance with safety and security protocols. It wasn't exactly a lie. Wells had provided oversight, even if it had been reluctant and after the fact. But it positioned the program as officially sanctioned rather than grassroots rebellion. And you are? Commander Brix asked Maya directly. Community liaison, Maya replied smoothly. I help coordinate between the refugee population and station administration on quality of life issues. Again, technically true. She had been coordinating between the refugees and Wells, and quality of life was certainly what they were discussing. Commander Brix consulted his datapad. I don't see a position of community liaison listed in the official staffing structure. Maya felt the moment balancing on a knife's edge. The wrong answer could unravel everything they had built over the past day. But she had learned in combat that sometimes the best defense was an unexpected offense. No, sir, she agreed. The position emerged from operational necessity. Refugee populations this size require internal coordination to prevent administrative bottlenecks and communication failures. Rather than adding paid staff, Administrator Wells approved a community leadership structure that utilizes existing human resources. She gestured toward the refugees working in the food preparation area, all of whom were performing their tasks with military precision. Former restaurant manager coordinating food services. Retired teacher organizing children's activities. Engineer consulting on space utilization issues. It's an efficient use of existing expertise while maintaining proper oversight. Commander Brix studied the activity around them, and Maya could see him evaluating what he observed against his security protocols. The refugees were organized but not militarized, cooperative but not suspicious, efficient but not threatening. "What's your background, Ms. Chun?" he asked, and Maya knew this was the critical question. "Terran Defense Corps," she replied without hesitation. "Infantry specialist. 3 tours in the Centauri Theater." Commander Brix's expression shifted slightly, and Maya saw recognition in his eyes. He was military intelligence, which meant he knew exactly what 3 tours in the Centauri Theater implied. "The 47th Infantry?" he asked. "42nd Pathfinders," Maya corrected, and saw his expression shift again. The 42nd Pathfinders had been an elite unit, known for operating independently in hostile territory. "I see," Commander Brix said quietly, and Maya understood that he did see. He saw a veteran who had learned to organize disparate groups under difficult circumstances, who understood chain of command and operational security, who could be trusted to maintain order rather than create chaos. Dr. Kethvar, who had been following this exchange with obvious interest, stepped forward. "Ms. Chun, could you walk us through the operational structure of this cooking program? I'd like to understand how decisions are made and how potential conflicts are resolved." Maya nodded toward Chun-Li, who began a detailed explanation of the kitchen's organization. As he spoke, Maya positioned herself where she could observe all 3 inspectors simultaneously, reading their reactions and adjusting her strategy accordingly. Chun-Li was perfect for this presentation. Professional, enthusiastic, but not excessive, clearly knowledgeable about food service operations. As he explained the rotation schedules, safety protocols, and waste management procedures, Maya could see the inspector's body language gradually relaxing. "The most significant challenge," Chun-Li was saying, "has been ingredient acquisition within our allocated budget. We've had to be creative about supplementing the basic nutritional provisions." "How creative?" Dr. Kethvar asked, and Maya heard the slight sharpening in her tone that suggested potential concern. "Trade networks with station personnel," Maya interjected smoothly. "Maintenance crew members who appreciate having access to fresh bread in exchange for hydroponics equipment. Administrative staff who enjoy having their uniforms cleaned by our former dry cleaning specialist in exchange for access to specialty ingredients." She gestured toward a corner of the hall where several refugees were working on what appear to be maintenance tasks. "We've identified ways for our community to contribute to station operations while meeting our own needs. It's mutually beneficial rather than parasitic." Commander Brix looked up from his datapad with obvious interest. "What kind of contributions?" Maya had been hoping for this question. "Engineering consultation on power distribution issues in Pod D, security assessments from our former law enforcement personnel, medical assistance during busy periods, educational support for station crew members pursuing advancement certifications." She paused, then added quietly, "Our people want to be useful, Commander. They want to contribute rather than just consume." The cooking program is just one example of what's possible when refugees are treated as resources rather than problems. Dr. Sinkuri, who had been quietly reviewing Dr. Kim's medical data, looked up from his tablet. "These psychological wellness indicators are quite remarkable," he said. I'm seeing measurable improvements in anxiety levels, social engagement, and future-oriented thinking across nearly every demographic group. How long has the program been operational? Dr. Kethvar asked. Maya felt another moment of potential danger. The honest answer was less than 48 hours, which would reveal how recently the program had been implemented. But Chunli stepped in with a response that was both truthful and strategic. The formal structure has been in place for 2 days, he said, but the community networks and skill sharing that made it possible have been developing over months. We've simply provided official recognition and proper resources for activities that were already happening informally. Maya nodded approvingly. Chunli had perfectly threaded the needle between honesty and strategic presentation. Dr. Kethvar consulted her own datapad, cross-referencing the timeline against the psychological wellness reports. And, Administrator Wells, you approved this program through normal channels? Wells, who had been growing more confident as the inspection proceeded positively, straightened slightly. The program represents an evolution of our community engagement protocols, he said with more authority than he usually displayed. MS. Chen's leadership capabilities and the residents' professional backgrounds created an opportunity to implement innovative wellness strategies while maintaining security and administrative oversight. Maya had to admit that Wells was performing better than she had expected. He was beginning to sound like an administrator who had deliberately fostered community development, rather than one who had stumbled into it accidentally. The inspection continued for another 2 hours, during which the team interviewed various refugees, examined the modified facilities, and reviewed administrative documentation. Maya watched from a distance as Commander Brix spoke quietly with some of the former military personnel among the refugees, noting how their bearing and responses clearly impressed him. Dr. Senkori spent considerable time with the families, observing interaction patterns and conducting informal psychological assessments. Maya could see him making notes with increasing frequency, and his body language suggested positive evaluation. Dr. Kethvar focused on the operational aspects of the shelter, examining everything from resource allocation to waste management to conflict resolution procedures. Maya made sure to be available for questions, but avoided appearing to hover or control the inspection process. As the formal evaluation concluded, Maya found herself standing with the inspection team in Administrator Wells' office, waiting for their preliminary assessment. This is an unusual situation, Dr. Kethvar began, her tone carefully neutral. We have a refugee population that has implemented significant modifications to standard protocols, with leadership emerging from within the community rather than through official appointment. Maya felt her muscles tense slightly, preparing for whatever conclusion was coming. However, Dr. Kethvar continued, the results speak for themselves. Community stability is high, psychological wellness indicators are excellent, and resource utilization is actually more efficient than baseline projections. She turned to Commander Brix, who nodded slowly. From a security standpoint, this community represents best-case scenarios rather than potential threats, he said. Clear leadership structure, productive community engagement, cooperation with station authority, and demonstrated ability to self-regulate. Dr. Senkori consulted his data one more time before speaking. Medical indicators suggest this approach should be considered for implementation across other refugee facilities. The psychological benefits appear to be significant and sustainable. Maya allowed herself to exhale slowly, though she kept her expression neutral. They had passed the inspection, but, more importantly, they had impressed the inspectors enough that the program might be expanded rather than shut down. Administrator Wells, Dr. Kethvar said, will be recommending that the council formally recognize and fund this community wellness program. You should expect increased budget allocation for equipment and ingredients, as well as official authorization to establish similar programs at other facilities. Wells' face lit up with obvious relief and excitement. Thank you, Dr. Kethvar. I'm confident that this approach represents the future of refugee community management. As the inspection team prepared to depart, Commander Brix approached Maya privately. "Ms. Chun," he said quietly, "you've built something remarkable here. These people trust you, and they're functioning as a unit. That doesn't happen by accident." Maya nodded, unsure how to respond. "The Council could use people with your skills in other capacities," he continued. "If you're interested in formal employment, I'd be happy to submit a recommendation." Maya felt a surprise she hadn't expected. After months of being told her military experience wasn't relevant to civilian work, here was someone offering her exactly the kind of opportunity she had thought was impossible. "I appreciate that, Commander," she said carefully. "But my commitment is to this community. They've invested in building something here, and I want to see it succeed." Commander Brix studied her for a moment, then smiled. "That's exactly the answer I was hoping to hear," he said. "It tells me my evaluation was correct. You're not looking for a way out. You're looking for a way to build something better where you are." As the inspection team departed, Maya found herself surrounded by refugees eager to know the results. The news that the program had not only been approved, but recommended for expansion spread through the shelter like wildfire, and Maya could feel the community's energy shift from cautious hope to genuine celebration. But even as she accepted congratulations and participated in the impromptu festivities, Maya found herself thinking about Commander Brix's offer. For months, she had felt like a soldier without a war, a leader without a mission. Now, for the first time since leaving the service, she had found something that felt like both.